Hi, I'm Elise Naramore. Perhaps you've created a draft of one or more learning progressions, but you know they aren't quite there yet. I've been helping teachers refine their learning progressions for years and have found that there are a handful of common issues that crop up, regardless of the subject or age of the students that the rubric is for. In this video, I'll show you how to identify strengths and spot areas for improvement, both in your own work and in the work of colleagues, so you can help each other. I will walk through several examples of draft rubrics to demonstrate the simple fixes. By the way, this is not just a learning progression model thing. You can use these tips even if you use the traditional assessment models. Listen, I've been using my 10 learning progressions for a decade now, and I'm still tweaking the language to improve their usefulness. This process isn't about perfection. It's about clarity, alignment, and improving student learning. So let's shift into critique mode using the four key qualities of a good rubric: choosing practices, breaking down achievement levels, ensuring flexibility and usefulness, and using clear, positive language. I created this rubric to help you evaluate your learning progressions from not enough evidence to expert for each of the four practices. You can read across the rows to see what stronger, clearer, or more flexible versions of that practice looks like. Feel free to go to my website at reimagineschools.com to download it for free. Do you have your own set of LPs out? As I walk through each row, review your own rubric, asking yourself which description best matches what I've written. What would need to change to move to the next level? You might find that you're at different levels in different rows. Completely normal. Growth is always the goal. In this first row, we're looking at how well you've chosen and defined your practices. For this, you are looking at the rubric as a whole. Most obviously, have you overtly defined your practices, including them on the document for reference? If not, you have not yet entered the rubric. It is important that you communicate the practices for yourself and for the stakeholders. If you did, then take a look at the wording of those practices. Are they clearly framed as actions that students do or as topics that you teach? One of the most difficult shifts for teachers is the move away from pure content. It's not that content is unimportant. It's that the practices should focus on skills that cross those content boundaries. If your learning progressions just name content areas, you're in the beginning level and need to revisit this. Next, do you have a set of 4 to 12 practices? This is not a hard and fast rule, but a general guideline for a course. More than this may be unmanageable and is usually a sign that you are breaking things down into micro skills instead of broad practices. I'll show you examples of this shortly. Here are some other questions that are at the proficient level. Are the practices distinct from one another? Do they represent the kinds of skills students will revisit over and over throughout the year? If your practices show purposeful, transferable skills that are both non-overlapping and relevant across multiple types of assessments, you're moving into advanced or even expert territory. Practice number 2 focuses on how you describe student growth. For this, again, you are looking at the rubric as a whole, but will also look at each learning progression individually. So this is a holistic approach. If you look at the beginning level here, do you have 3 or more achievement levels? I have 6, including the not enough evidence level, but this may not be appropriate for elementary school. Do the levels have names instead of numbers? Move on to check developing level criteria. Did you think about each achievement level as an incremental step that has an implied anchor word? For example, my anchor word for developing level is relevant. So whenever I create developing level criteria, no matter what the practice is, I think about what does a relevant response look like? In this way, every learning progression is consistent with all of the other learning progressions in terms of what it means to earn a particular score. Even when I made this learning progression for you, I tried to describe the relevant characteristics for this practice. While they may not be implemented correctly, they are present. So if you have a consistent anchor word, regardless of the learning progression, this is proficient level. If you overtly can use that anchor word in the description of the criteria, that's advanced. You don't have to do that every single time, but most of the time. Additional proficient level criteria include using non-judgmental level names, which is a very simple thing to fix. Don't forget to check if you're using emojis, especially for your early and not yet there readers. Does your achievement level represent a pathway that starts with a low floor so that even your most challenged students can access the rubric? Does it end with a high ceiling to give your accelerated students somewhere to stretch? Ask yourself, Does each level reflect authentic growth, or are the divisions artificial? This is difficult to do in advance. I found this became very obvious as I scored student work during the first year or two of rubric use. So don't pressure yourself to be perfect here. It's going to take some time. At the expert level, the progression isn't just incremental, it's sophisticated, developmentally accurate, and logically connected across each level. Moving to practice number 3, this asks whether your learning progression can do more than just support a single lesson or test. For this, you're looking at your individual learning progressions, evaluating them each separately. The learning progression itself should be about skills, and ideally, the same learning progression should be useful across different units and assignments. We discussed this about the practices in the 2 previous slides, but now it's about the learning progression itself. It should reflect skills, not content, and give students multiple chances to get feedback and practice. Check the beginning level. If either of those is true, then great, move to the developing level. If you frame the learning progression around skill development and it works for multiple specific assignments, then we can check the proficient level. Can you use the learning progression across multiple assignments and in many contexts within your class? Will the learning progression be useful in tracking student competence in disciplinary practices? Will students get some practice and feedback on that learning progression in each unit? If the answer is yes to all 3 of those, then move to the advanced level. One of the more common issues is that of double jeopardy. This might show up as needing to earn advanced on one learning progression in order to earn like beginning or developing in another learning progression. At the higher levels, your learning progression should stand on its own without needing other learning progressions to make sense. If your descriptors are too tied to a single context or require other progressions to work, it's time to revise. At this point, especially note if it's easy to provide feedback to students that clearly states what the next step is. This is one of my favorite things about a well-constructed learning progression, so refine your language. For example, I might say to you, hey, just omit the overt reference to the Civil War in this learning progression so that you could use the rubric no matter what essay you have assigned. Strong learning progressions are written from the student's perspective, using language that is clear, specific, and actionable. This is the area where I find the most need. That's great news because it's also the easiest thing to fix. Writing from the student's point of view means using I statements. Do this even for little ones who may not be directly using the rubric. It's a very helpful state of mind for us, keeping the language clear so we can model it for the students. Let's also replace deficit-based phrasing with statements about what students can do. Let's talk about the quality of the work, not the quantity. And let's use specific language instead of vague statements about partial or some. I always try to use action verbs when I can. Make the growth between levels overt. Each level should build on the last, but you only need to describe the new observable elements, not repeat old stuff. This avoids repetition and overly wordy rubrics, which then people won't use. We want the criteria to be easy to read and understand, especially for students and families. Okay, so that's the whole rubric. Did you evaluate your rubric as we went through it? And how'd you do? If this is your very first critique, you may be at the beginning and developing levels. This is perfectly normal, so don't worry. You can still use your rubric as long as you have at least proficient on the 4 practices here, and I'm going to help you do that. So moving to advanced will probably require implementation with students so that you can identify the areas in need of improvement. I'm going to help you get there. In the rest of this video, I'll critique several rubrics, pointing out how to make the learning progressions more student-centered, coherent, and most importantly, useful. As I do, please revise your own. This method has proven to be very effective with many people. A few notes before we begin. Due to space constraints on these slides, I did not often include the entire practice nor the entire set of learning progressions. Also note, I'm not a subject matter in everything, but I am a rubric design expert. Because of this, you may disagree with my critiques, and that's fine. You should tailor your learning progressions depending on your specific practices and curricular requirements as well as your context. So let's try it. This is a 4th grade math rubric. Remember I mentioned earlier that a common error is breaking the skills down into steps that are microscopic. This is a great example of this. It not only limits the application of the rubric, but will take the teacher ages to score each student work. And why does this limit application? So let's just look at the very first line, identifying keywords. See how the author added one word at a time? In what context will all of those be used? What happens if a problem only has addition in it? Then they can't earn more than beginning, and it's not the kid's fault. What happens if it only has subtraction? Then they can't even get beginning. So then they're not on the rubric at all, since addition is a requirement to start. So that's going to be a problem for the teacher during scoring. Why don't you score this rubric using our Critiquing LP's rubric? Pause the video while you do so. When scoring this using our rubric, here's what I end up with. They didn't share their practices on the document, so I don't have the ability to evaluate the learning progression, the first one. The learning progressions don't seem to have anchors that I can detect. The learning progressions don't seem to be useful across the board and seem restricted to a specific unit from what I can tell. And lastly, there are no I statements and lots of deficit language stating what's missing or wrong. So let's improve it. When looking at this rubric as a whole, the practice names themselves seem to describe steps of the problem-solving process. I found that I could simplify the entire rubric into one learning progression. Now, we're including finding keywords, but the specifics of what those words would be on a word wall, on the assignment description, or presented somewhere like that. This enables the teacher to use this all year long, no matter what math vocabulary they're targeting. Listen, there's still room for improvement here. For example, the language needs to be revised to first person for student use, but now the author has made their job much easier. Take a moment to read this one from a 4th grade project rubric. To give you some context, this is just one learning progression from a set of 5, developed by a team of teachers to use on their science projects. Again, displaying all 5 rows would be impossible to read here, so just know that they developed practices and a full rubric, which I have seen. Here's what I ended up with. They described the practices on their document and had 5 learning progressions total. The learning progressions don't seem to have anchors that I could detect, nor do they go from low to high. The learning progressions seem to be general enough to be useful across multiple units. However, there are no I statements and lots of deficit language. So let's improve it. I want to provide guidance on how students can progress to the next level of achievement. Essentially, rather than highlighting deficiencies or inadequacies at a particular level, the rubric should articulate the positive attributes present at the next level. Instead of focusing on what your students are lacking or missing, the emphasis shifts to what they can do. This strengths-based approach simplifies feedback, allowing instructors to provide guidance on how students can progress to the next level of achievement. By solely addressing what is present rather than what is deficient, the rubric promotes a constructive and encouraging learning environment. So this is a really easy change. For example, instead of saying data is not clear or neat, let's just say it's there. I'm not going to make a judgment on whether it's good or bad. I just want to make sure they have it there. So I say data is displayed. So I can tell the student, hey, just add some visuals to move to level 2. I would reverse the order of the achievement levels and rename them. Reversing the order allows students to clearly see what is required at lower stages and build upon them, like ascending steps on a ladder. Students are fully aware of the expectations at each level and can better gauge their own progress and areas for improvement. Renaming helps remove any stigma associated with lower levels, and it fosters a more positive and growth-oriented learning environment. It may seem really silly, but it can promote a more constructive approach to assessing student progress and achievement. Even emojis like smiley faces can be harmful or detrimental, making kids feel bad. I mean, can you imagine being like in 2nd grade, getting a frowny or crying emoji on your work? Using metamorphosis is both non-judgmental and more representative of how growth happened. Who has ever looked at a caterpillar and said, "You're a bad caterpillar, be a butterfly faster"? Each stage has its own nutritional and environmental requirements, and a range of appropriate times when it's time to move on. This is the same for our students and their learning journeys. Feel free to use any metamorphosis that works for you, especially for young ones. Now we're going to change to I statements. You don't need to do that in every single sentence, but as a general rule, you can do it. In addition, keep it active without can, which puts it in a more passive voice. We don't want their potential, what they can potentially do. We want what we can actually see and measure. Last, let's incorporate words like and or when appropriate to allow for adaptability in meeting criteria. This avoids boxing you in. We don't want to have rigidity because that will limit the rubric's applicability. So how did we do? Reevaluate the rubric. What do you think? I think we did a good job. The things in purple boxes require looking at all of the practices together, so we really can't evaluate this unless we had all four in front of us. Let's look at a few more, but I'm going to speed it up a bit and not go in quite as much detail. Here's another one for young students, this time for preschool. Take a moment to read and evaluate it. What changes would you recommend? Pause the video to do this. Here are my thoughts: proficient, developing, advanced, and beginning. Because we don't have the entire rubric in front of us, we can't fully evaluate it, and the purple boxes again represent where I felt the author was constrained. Let's look at a high school social studies rubric. Why don't you pause the video to see what you think? What do you notice when reading it over? 3 things really jumped out at me. There's a lot of deficit language. It's all written from a teacher point of view, and a lot of the communication seems to be missing about, like, what do I do in order to move up? What does it mean to need a little bit more context? What does it mean to have an ambiguous thesis statement? Understand that some of these things may be things that you teach in your class or might be on the assignment sheet, and that's okay, but you want to make sure that anything that's in language that students may not know is overtly taught. Here are my thoughts: developing, beginning, proficient, and not enough evidence. The purple boxes represent where I felt the author was constrained and what I would suggest to fix first. Here are the revisions that the teacher made as we worked on this together. She added non-judgmental achievement levels. She used strengths-based language throughout, explaining what is needed instead of what was missing. She got rid of very judgmental words like weak and inadequate. She changed criteria to describe desired characteristics in specific student-friendly language. She also used anchor words throughout. I hope this was useful to you. Revising your rubrics, regardless of whether or not you use the learning progression model, will make your work exponentially easier. It streamlines your scoring, provides more useful feedback for students, and creates a more transparent path for growth that's very consistent. If you'd like to learn more, you can find detailed information on my website, in my book, The Learning Progression Model, by subscribing to my Substack newsletter, or by watching my guided courses here on YouTube. If you want more personalized help, please reach out by email. I'm always happy to work with people. Thanks for watching.